Minecraft Bedrock Edition makes over $100 million a year for Mojang in microtransactions alone. Meanwhile, Minecraft Java had its logo changed from this to represent that it's just one edition of the game. I have played thousands of hours of the Bedrock console and even one for the 3DS version of Minecraft, and each of these are unique and special in their own way, but what isn't is Mojang's treatment of them. Despite huge complaints of Mojang preferring the version that makes them more money, I think the truth is actually somewhere closer to the opposite, and to prove that, let's look at the way they bug fixed the game. Mojang allowed iron golems to spawn in more places on Java, including on glass, and there was a huge outrage from the Java technical community, and so literally 2 days later, in the next pre-release, they managed to fix it very, very quickly indeed. Meanwhile, on a similar time frame, Mojang broke the way that maps display for the player in previews. This was just after 1.21 came out, where you needed a trial chamber map, and so you needed to know which direction from the trial chamber you were, but Mojang had this bug which made it impossible to see which rotation you were while you were outside the map to see if you were facing it or not, but also made it so if you were far enough away, your map marker would eventually disappear altogether. This meant you could get a map to a woodland mansion that would just not have any player marker on there, making it impossible to ever find. Just saying there is a woodland mansion in your world, this is ridiculous, and so obviously Mojang doesn't do daily bug fixes on the Bedrock version, but the next week's bug fix actually did not fix this at all. And then 1.20, 1.30, despite all the complaints, managed to come out with this feature in there, despite it being listed as a bug, despite it being complained about, and despite it not being listed on the changelog. This made maps worse, and then fun fact, after it rolled out for all of the millions of players, they realized that this is a big deal, and so they fixed it in the next version, except I'm joking, to this day it is still broken, but it's entirely fine, because those of you who play Java will say, well, that's the Java way. Actually, that's how maps are meant to be, although I think Java players would actually prefer to see their player marker with the rotation at all times on the map to make it easier to see where they're going. And indeed, they might like to put horses and boats too, because players will complain, and Mojang ignores this, while many beloved features on the Java edition remain missing in Bedrock to this day. Why are you able to build on the roof of the Nether only if you're playing the 1 edition of the game? Why can you only hold 7 or 8 items in your offhand on the Bedrock version, meanwhile you can hold literally any in Java? Why can you only pause the game on Java? How is it that the pause menu only works on one version? Meanwhile, there is no problem adding a new button to the Bedrock version of the game, even to Pocket Edition, that allows you to do emotes, which, by the way, you can buy for real-world money. If you're curious, by the way, like, no, Toycat, you made a mistake, the pause button's right there. If you press this pause button, not only does it not pause the game, but it prompts you that maybe you'd like to buy something in the marketplace while you're here. In what world is this the preferred version? How can anyone look at these facts and say that Bedrock is the one that Mojang puts more attention and love into? Well, let's go through the features that have been added to both Java and Bedrock in the last 6 months, and let's see the difference in how they've been implemented, because this is the most crucial way to see how they treat the game, not just in how the game exists, but in how they update the game as time goes on, because this is one of the beauties of how Minecraft does what it does. And so let's start with the Pale Garden, which exposed to most people the difference between Java snapshots and Bedrock previews, which is to say they are very different systems, but Mojang treats the Bedrock previews like they are the underclass of this, and the best proof of that is the Pale Garden in both the generation and in terms of the texture, because they were both added to Bedrock and Java with a small delay between them, but despite the Bedrock version coming out later, it was actually an earlier version of both the biome and the wood set. This was confirmed to us by Japper in this tweet right here, confirming that the Java version has the current iteration and that eventually it will be fixed in a later preview for Bedrock. Why did this even happen in the first place? Well, it used to be that both Bedrock and Java would independently start developing the update and then try to make sure it was the same later. However, quite a few large features were added to Bedrock that couldn't be developed for Java easily, and so they had to remove them in the end, and to avoid having issues like this, it seems as though they have started working on features for Java first, and then porting them to Bedrock if they're able to. This kind of removes one of the big benefits of Bedrock as a platform, but even more crucially, this doesn't actually cause the stated goal to happen, because Java gets all of the features first, and only a few features end up coming out for Bedrock first, but more crucially is when we move into the second weird thing which is different between versions, you'll realize that they're only only replicating the major features that you might spot, and friend of the channel, Agent Mindstorm, has put together this fun table which shows you the name for a Java sound event added over the last couple of years, then the Bedrock sound event name, it lets you know if those names match, and then lets you know if the implementation actually matches in any way. So let's now take a look at the creaking, which was of course just added, and all you can see right here on this list is all of these different sounds are differently named between Java and Bedrock, and then also have different sounds entirely too. Either the pitch differs or the volume differs, or in the case of this one sound, the parrot imitating the creaking, the volume and the pitch are different. This is kind of a crazy change if you think about it, because it means that somehow, while recording audio files and then just disseminating them to the two versions, somehow they implemented it in an entirely different way. It's literally just an audio file. It's as if you found out that a texture was different, and oh yeah, it turns out that Pale Oak was very different. This is seemingly just a normal thing for Mojang, and do you know what else is seemingly normal? The trial chamber encounters. Do you remember the Tricky Trials update that came out in the summer of this year? Did you know that there were some changes still being made to the structure after the update was released, such as the adding of an entirely new type of hallway called the encounters? There were 5 of these, and these actually came to Bedrock first in a preview. Woo, Bedrock! This is one of the few times they got something major. It was very fun to go through and find all of these, but this feature actually ended up getting removed, as it started causing some serious issues with existing trial chambers in people's worlds. But get this, the Java edition still got them added to their snapshots, and as there were no issues with them in the world generation, they decided to release the updated version of the trial chambers in 1.20.1.3, while the Bedrock edition still has it missing. There is no known date that they are going to be fixing this for Bedrock, and at time of recording, there is just a major feature that was added to Java but not Bedrock, and which they don't seem to have a major solution for. This is the kind of problem with the game going through so much work to make parity happen, and it's the fact that when you go through so much work to make it the same, but then don't actually achieve it, you go through most of the hard work without some of the benefits. And another great example would be the bug fixes. It is widely known that Minecraft Bedrock, or Bugrock as some people call it, has a large number of bugs, and this is something the Mojang developers are aware of because they have a bug tracker where you can actually report any issues we have with the game, and this is what allows developers to go in and fix them. So there are actually tens of thousands of bugs for both Java and Bedrock, but one of the most notable things is that Java does a little bit better with fixing bugs. That is the conclusion from the public at least, but it's something I wanted to test, and so I decided to look at the 1.20.1.30 changelog for Bedrock, and just for fun, include 1.20.1.40, which are roughly equivalent to 1.20.1.2 for Java. Java releases fewer minor updates, but they seem to have slightly bigger ones, at least when it comes to bug fixes, because by counting the lines on both of these Bedrock changelogs combined, we got 152 bugs fixed. How many were there in the Java edition? 433. Now, you could argue that this means that Java is buggier if it needs so many bug fixes, but I think that by and large people say no. Yeah, this is just a case of Bedrock finding it harder to fix the bugs that they are creating because keeping up with making the features seems to be harder over there. Is there perhaps a deeper cause for that? Well, I think we could look at hardcore mode to get a good idea of this. So hardcore mode was just added to Bedrock in the second half of this year, which, just a reminder, is 13 years after it was added to Java. And I guess we could say better late than never, but some people would argue, actually, no, this isn't true. And to prove this to you, here is a really fun issue which can happen to you in hardcore in the current version of the game. Okay, this is really bad, but you've got to conclude that, yeah, not many players are using a trident with Riptide. It is incredibly handy, especially in the rain, but you know what? It's not that big of a deal because it's not like it's going to occur on something players do every day, right? Just kidding. Bridging out and then the game not liking that you're doing that. Phantom bridging. You can immediately die from this too. Even more scary in my opinion is that sometimes the game client still desyncs with the internal game server. That's right, the single player game has issues with multiplayer, and so you might just be building up like this and then all of a sudden... Okay, this guy was actually in hardcore, and thankfully he survived, but if he had just had a little bit less health, or indeed if he had had this happen twice in a row, he would be immediately dead. This is very bad, and especially if you compare it to Java, which has a stable hardcore mode, which has existed for over a decade, and has a very large player base, which largely doesn't have these same sorts of issues happening on the regular basis. There's even a huge YouTube trend of people playing Minecraft Java hardcore, and it's just not an expected thing to have that death occur in the same same way that it is on Bedrock, which is one of the things they need to do if they want to get Bedrock up to Java's level. Okay, so after those last 5 examples, you might still think that Mojang prefers Bedrock, or at the very least that it doesn't prefer Java and it's all coincidences, but instead then, let's take a look at Minecraft Live this year. This is the biggest event in the Minecraft calendar, and it's when they announced their next update, and in the case of this year, it was the Pale Garden and the Creaking. And whenever they showed off these 2 brand new features, they showed it off on the Java edition, as they do every single year. Whenever they announce features for both Java and Bedrock, they show off the Java edition, and you could argue this isn't favoritism, but instead is developer preference, and maybe that's true, but then when they were showing off a new feature for the Bedrock edition, Hardcore, this is specifically a feature that has existed on Java for most of a decade and is only now coming to Bedrock, there was a clip where the developers didn't even enable Hardcore mode, which is pretty wild because they couldn't do a water bucket clutch while having Hardcore on, but even crazier in my opinion is when they did later turn on Hardcore, and it was to show off how the bundles work on Bedrock, and so they used the Bedrock inventory. Look, it really feels like they care about Bedrock now, except all of a sudden when they start actually mining some coal, one of the items they want to put in their bundle, you can see that it doesn't get added to the inventory, and indeed the XP doesn't go up when they hover over that too, and this is a confirmation that the inventory was added on later, a very bizarre feature to be sure, but it looks as though the reason this might be true is that they were actually just playing Java Edition again and then putting the Bedrock UI on top of it. This is a very bizarre claim, I'll admit, but it's a very bizarre way to show off a feature, and the only other alternative is that they had something in the hotbar they wanted to hide and then didn't do a very good job of realizing that the hotbar would change over time. It is a very strange situation, and I think the only explanation is that even the team that get the gameplay so they can make these trailers, even the development side of things, are using the Java edition first and deciding it's easier just to make it look like Bedrock than to actually just play the other version of their game, which is an insane one, but I think the most likely outcome from what we've seen. And you know what else is likely? Redstone on Java is just plain weird, and honestly, the community loves it that way, but Mojang does not, and so when it came to Bedrock and designing the redstone there, it changed to be a bit more logical, you might say if you're Mojang, or illogical if you're a redstoner, but the point is that this is the redstone that Mojang wants you using, and it's been that way on Bedrock for almost a decade. So here's the deal, what do you think happened when they designed this new, better redstone system that has bugs on Bedrock that wouldn't be replicated on Java? Did they move this system over to Java, where the players would be unhappy, or did they say, oh yeah, Java players actually really don't like this, and left it the way it wanted to be? Indeed, lots of changes that Mojang wants to make to Minecraft, such as adding the marketplace or skins or anything like that, are added to the Bedrock version exclusively, and then left alone on Java. This does lead to some sad Java players who might want the new redstone system, or even more ridiculously, want to download $9 Minecraft maps that just say it's a modern house with unique furniture, but ultimately, the idea is that you will have all sorts of features that Mojang wants on the Bedrock version of the game, but that the community on Java specifically wouldn't want over there. In other words, the Java version is run based on democratic desire and what the players want, whereas the Bedrock version is run based on what Mojang wants for you. The most poignant example of this would have to be the version selector. If you are playing any Java version of the game, you can choose if you want to go back in time and play an older version of the game. They'll give you the warning that the multiplayer isn't going to be moderated and that there might be bugs, but you're free to play whatever version you like, whereas when it comes to Minecraft Bedrock, there is exactly one version of the game that Mojang wants you playing, and it's whatever the latest version is. Do you want to avoid some features by not downloading it? Well, that's not your choice to do, and so Mojang is just able to patch in and out anything they like. The most famous example of this would be that Mojang officially says you should not be able to build on the roof of the Nether. This is not intended gameplay, and so they have never added it to the Bedrock version, despite the number of fun farms that are possible in Java, whereas it already is on the Java edition, and so they're not going to remove a feature that already exists, but that immediately puts a giant hole in the way of parity, and also immediately makes you realize what Microsoft's priority truly is with the different versions of the game. If you wanted them to be exactly the same, there would almost be no version to creating that second version, outside of, you could argue, some compatibility reasons. There is almost no reason to have two identical versions side by side if they are literally identical, identical, and so there is always going to have to be differences, and those differences are going to stem from this idea of, well, if we make a mistake the first time, we're not going to do it that way the second. This is one of the theories of how you can see the Bedrock version of Minecraft, that it is effectively Minecraft v2, or if you want to be less affectionate, that Mojang or Notch made Minecraft Java Edition, and that the more corporate version is Minecraft Bedrock, which significantly ramped up after Microsoft's acquisition of the company. This is the origin of the name Microsoft's Minecraft, and ultimately that stems from the fact that if Minecraft were to be made today, it would be Bedrock 100%, and that is something which might sound contentious, but think about the way that it's developed and even the language level. Minecraft Java is just available on far fewer platforms than Bedrock. If you were to know that you were building a successful game, you would build on the one that could be ported to the most places possible. That much is very true by itself, but so too would you consider the very performance of the base engine. Minecraft Java is, to put it politely, spaghetti code. This is what even developers today will call it. Every single developer that adds a new feature to Java has to work it into the big spaghetti mess that is Java, and this means that they are much more limited in what they can do and the performance of it. However, on the Bedrock version, things have been built from the ground up to be much more performative. Indeed, you get far higher render distances and frame rates. The fact that it can run on phones is probably the easiest way to prove that, but you can similarly prove that basically every feature that is added to Bedrock, and keep in mind that is not every Minecraft feature yet, there are still Java exclusives, as is one of the big point in this video, that after 9 years they haven't managed to do that, but every single time they add a feature from Java, they don't just incorporate it into the game, they put it in a very data-driven way, which means that it's very easy to modify it later down the line, but also easy for other players to modify it themselves using an add-on. So for example, instead of knowing every single block that's in the game, Minecraft has a list of them which players can add to, or the behavior of entities is entirely changeable by any add-on at any point in time. This is something which takes a little bit more work to program in the first place, but which has much bigger benefits, especially if you as a company want to sell those same add-ons, and this is also true for backwards compatibility. Even though that main feature of going back in time to earlier versions is missing from Bedrock, instead the game basically has copies of all the other versions inside of it by knowing which features it should disable if you load up a map which was previously set and which was intended to be played in an older version of Minecraft. This means that if something new comes out and breaks your map, then it won't actually need to if you version lock that map. The vast majority of Minecraft marketplace content is version locked, and so if they don't update it, you can play a map that's from 1.18 in your current version of Minecraft and it works just fine. Now, the reason they did this is clear. I don't need to explain to you the profit motive behind making it possible to be able to play any add-on or any map from any time in Minecraft. Obviously, this means they can continue to sell the huge volume of content, and wow, 100 million a year in microtransactions, you say? But it also has a huge benefit to the end user, sort of in a weirder, indirect way. If you ask the average player what they want, they might say they want these one-click features, but they would probably want a lot more gameplay features more, which is why Java has never put in the time to work on their modding API, despite many promises. And so, yeah, we are in this interesting world where if Minecraft was made today, it probably would be exclusively Bedrock, but I want to raise the interesting question of, would that actually have been a good thing? The development pattern of Minecraft Bedrock is much more methodical, but as a result, it is much slower. Instead of 2 days to fix a bug, we have 200 days, and counting, if I'm being honest. Instead of being able to immediately react to something that has happened, it takes at least 3 weeks to go through an actual update, assuming it's not a health fix. There are many slower parts of the Bedrock ecosystem, and honestly, the development as a whole seems like it is done not from a place of passion and love for the game, as you would probably assume most Java developers are doing, but instead because there is a huge list of features they want to add and someone has assigned it to them, and that they have to do that to keep on earning their salary. There is a very big difference between what happens when an indie studio makes a game and everyone has love for it, and indeed when a giant corporation makes a game and they're just looking to get the thing done because they know that's how they make their profit. I think that this is something which even goes deeper into the game, because if Minecraft was made this way today, it might be more efficient and everyone might have higher render distances and mods would have been much easier to get into and the whole world would have been different in perhaps a better way. But also, I think because of the fact that if we look at how Java players see Bedrock, there is this great sense that it is the other, the weird thing to mess with. Based on my experience talking to Java YouTubers, it is like, yeah, the Bedrock version, that's technically Minecraft you play over there, huh? And as a result, most of these Java players do not touch it with a 12-foot pole, unless they are actively being paid by Mojang, which is the funniest thing, right? That Mojang needs to pay people in their own game to play the version of it they don't want to, but unless they are actively being paid, they are not not going to play it, and so how many of those Java players, and indeed those Java YouTubers, would have ever gotten into it? Without that critical mass of Java players and YouTubers sharing videos, builds, and all of the wonderful things, would Bedrock have been able to sell as many copies? Indeed, even though Minecraft Bedrock is the technically superior product that is easier to use, runs better, and has 99% of the same features, many people actually prefer the one that runs a bit worse and is a bit jankier and just has the passion and the love in it. Is that something that would have massively changed the course of history? Well, I think it's worth pointing out what these differences actually are, and so let's quickly go into the Bedrock features that just don't work the same as their Java counterparts to really show you how different the two versions are. So we've spoken about parity and how some features are just missing from either Bedrock or Java, or indeed how there are huge implementation differences for certain things, but there are also just certain features that are done so wildly different between the two versions that you genuinely would not expect that you could call them both Minecraft. And to show you them, I figured I would actually show you some footage of me playing hardcore Minecraft. I'll admit, it's day 0 right now, I haven't survived my first night, but a lot of the crazy differences come back to back to back right here, and let me show you all of them. First of all, we have Bedrock regen. This is the fact that I am regenerating very slowly in health, 1/2 heart every 4 seconds, despite having a full hunger bar. This is painful by itself, but it's extra painful because the way the shield works is also fundamentally different. It only works while I'm crouched. I can't hold it down and do other things. I have to be crouched, just kind of walking around, desperately hoping that I don't get obliterated here, which is also pretty bad by itself. But then combine the fact that when the craziest thing happens and a blaze comes out, there's no way for me to take down both the blaze and the magma cube because there's no sweeping edge, or indeed no multi-attacks on Bedrock. You're attacking one target and one target only. Some people would argue that it's better that you can swing your sword multiple times, but I would argue that I'm dead, and I wouldn't be dead if it weren't for the regeneration, combined with the shield, which is much less functional on Bedrock. Because you have to be crouching to use it, you can't immediately crouch and expect it to work, meaning that you actually basically have to stay in the crouch mode and can't do anything while you're trying to resist attacks. This means that if you have a particularly stubborn enemy, and as we saw previously, the magma cube can attack you twice per second, unlike most mobs, which is a ridiculous fact, but one which really leans into the idea that you need to have your shield active at all times when one is nearby. And then if we come back to the offhand, Bedrock only lets you hold 7 items in your offhand. One of them is the shield, which is kind of nice, but given that it's activated by crouching anyway, it's not really an offhand item, and so in effect we have a whole extra inventory slot for Java, 37 versus 36, but even crazier is it's a whole extra hotbar slot. Minecraft Java just has that whole extra item, while Minecraft Bedrock suffers. And why is this the case? The answer always comes back to weird hang-ups in Mojang around how the combat update was handled all of those years ago, and at this point I think there's only one thing we can say about this, which is to ponder the opposite side of the equation from my perspective as a Bedrock player, which is that actually, maybe this is a good thing, actually. One of the most remarkable things about Microsoft's acquisition of Mojang is just how hands-off they were with the company. When they wanted to do something with Mojang, it was always on top of what they were already doing. And to prove this the most extensive way, let's point out the fact that Minecraft could have been made an Xbox exclusive, and it would have massively shifted the console war in Microsoft's favor, but they decided to forego those synergies to let Mojang continue doing what they were up to. Indeed, the only real way that Xbox ties into Minecraft is by having limited edition consoles and controllers and taking advantage of the IP in ways like that. Instead of trying to take over the existing merchandise, they just kind of expanded those agreements, and indeed, instead of trying to dictate the way the game flowed, they basically just made their own version of it. This is actually really interesting if you think about it, that instead of taking over a game and just kind of working on that, they effectively took over a version of the game and worked on the much less known about, if more popular, Minecraft Pocket Edition, turning it into the Bedrock we know today. However, despite slowly making this the version of the game that is much more profitable to them, to the tune of $100 million a year, they still have resisted the idea of forcing as many Minecraft players there as possible. In the same way that they could have shut down Minecraft PlayStation as a boost to Minecraft Xbox, they could shut down Minecraft Java, and you can argue that some players wouldn't transfer over, but a substantial number would, even though you might lose some publicity in the form of YouTube YouTubers, you would get lots of other ones shifting over to a version where them and their subscribers would be making Microsoft even more money. This is something that the average Mojang employee definitely wouldn't have wanted, and indeed I can imagine that the big players like Jeb and Agnes are very much against this too. And what's really interesting is that even though they have a no doubt business case for shutting down the version, they have chosen not to do so. The most they've done in that direction is by renaming the Java edition of the game, the Java edition, while shifting their focus as Minecraft Bedrock being the main Minecraft. But then on top of all of that stuff, they then actually don't really make Minecraft Java the secondary edition. Like I mentioned, when they can develop a cool feature that would be possible on Bedrock but not on Java, they don't actually add it to Bedrock. This is insane if you ask me from a Bedrock perspective, but if you're a Java player, you can probably see this as one of the ways Mojang keeps Microsoft in check. If you want to make the Bedrock version of the game, you know, the money version of the game better, you're going to have to make the Java edition better too. In a way, this is almost the best thing a Java edition player could hope for. Indeed, when I speak to some of my friends who are Java players, some of whom are YouTubers, they're all very excited because it means that somehow you're in this world where you're playing the lesser played version of the game, but everyone who plays the more played version is there for you. In a weird way, Minecraft Bedrock is the version that mops up all of the players, and then it can direct people towards the Java in some ways. In fact, the Java player base no doubt benefits from Bedrock without having to make too many concessions to it. This is something that is wild, and when you look at the situation with things like capes, where they'll add a brand new cape to Bedrock as a accomplishment for completing a Minecraft Bedrock server, and then there is an outrage from Java players saying we want it too, and they just go ahead and capitulate anyway. This is something which is kind of crazy, but shows that they are fully willing to listen to the Java community. Is this a good thing? Yes, listening to Java players is great. However, there is an outcome that is even better than this one, and it's the one where probably they listen to both versions players with the same level of care and attention. And honestly, this entire topic reminds me of my experience growing up as one of two siblings, but having an older brother, and my older brother was always talking about, wow, I can't believe everyone prefers you so much. And to my experience, you know, being the brother that clearly was less cared about because my parents had had a child, they practiced doing some, you know, parenting things that were fun with him, and then by the time I got that age, they're like, we've already done this before. You know, my brother didn't get to see the experiences that he had that I didn't, and so from his perspective, I was the favorite, and my parents were always listening to me, but from my perspective, he was the favorite, and my parents were always listening to him, except in the case of Minecraft, Java, and Bedrock, I think there clearly is a favorite, and it is the Java edition, and the only debate really has to be, is that actually a good thing? And the answer is honestly, maybe. Mojang may or may not have an actual favourite version of the game, but all of their actions show they are much more connected with the community that play the same version of the game that they do. At this point, I think the only question we have left to answer is why, and I think the simplest one could be that developers don't really play as much Bedrock as they do Java. For their jobs, they totally will. They need to test code branches, but for their spare time, probably not. Indeed, the version of the game that probably got many Minecraft developers into it was the Java edition, and so will this problem actually just solve itself? Well, if you were a child during the early console or Pocket Edition era, or indeed a teenager, you are just now entering the workforce or have just started moving jobs within it. This means that the new hires at Mojang going forwards are almost certainly going to be people with deeper experience in the Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3. I spoke to a community manager recently that said, yeah, actually, I used to play Minecraft PlayStation Edition and I shifted from there to Java, but this reminded me that even people who play Java now have that experience in consoles and Bedrock, and at the very least don't want to see it become the shafted version of the game, and that hopefully one day we get a studio with just as many Bedrock players as it does Java, because this is a big version of the game, and hopefully one day there are enough developers to make it a beautiful addition worthy of bearing the name. Thanks for joining me on this 30-minute rant disguised as a video essay, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.